Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Bend Motorcycle Adventures Podcast. This is your hub for everything off-road, dual sport, and adventure motorcycle. And now, here's your host, John.
Hey guys, welcome back. This is episode 38 of the Bend Motorcycle Adventures Podcast. And if you enjoy this content each and every week, don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe to our show. Okay, bear with me, listeners. We're going to rewind about 13 years today on the episode, and I'm going to recall a ride gone wrong, if you will. About 13 years ago, I found myself in what I would refer to as a very dangerous situation. I don't know if I would label it as life-threatening, but due to a lack of planning, preparation, and really just one wrong turn, things escalated very quickly, as they like to say. So I want to walk you through that, the mistakes that I made. We'll recall the event, and then at the end of the show, we'll kind of recap some of the things that you can do to help mitigate finding yourself in that kind of situation, mitigate the risk. So if you're new to adventure, dual sport, or off-road riding, hopefully this will shorten your learning curve, because reality is, when we talk about off-road, dual sport, and adventure riding, most of us don't walk in with all the skills and the experience that we need. There's some trial and error, and I hate to sound cliche, but sometimes we have to learn the hard way, and that is exactly what happened to me in November of 2006. All right, I want to just take a moment here and set the stage for you. Middle of November, Central Oregon, high desert, cold mornings, semi-warm afternoons. I lived in the valley at the time, but my buddy and I wanted to go riding. We'd been keeping an eye on the weather and the conditions, and we knew it was going to be epic. So we booked a room. We planned to ride 2 days, and the first day we drove over in the morning, had to make a bit of a commute, so we got a late start, and I think we finished up our first loop at about 2:30 that first afternoon. No big deal, right? I mean, it's 2:30. I know it's middle of November. We've probably got till 4:30 or 5 in the afternoon till we're really without sunlight. And yeah, for the most part, it is no big deal. 99 times out of 100, I knock that ride out. We do 20, 30 miles. It's amazing. And then we go back and have dinner and talk about how great it was. Unfortunately, I made a critical error, took a wrong turn, extended our ride far beyond what I had intended, and we got way away from the truck, away from where we were parked. I'm talking 20, 25 miles away, and what do you know? I ran out of gas. So I don't know if you've ever had that sinking kind of feeling in your stomach when you realize that something awful has just happened, but I definitely went through that and maybe panicked a little bit internally. Now, I knew where we were, which was a good thing, and we'll get to that. But also it was a bad thing, because I knew how far we were away from the truck, and my partner was riding a 250F. I was riding a 450, and I began to think, well, it's just a matter of time before he runs out of gas too. So a lot of scenarios start running through my mind, and I'm trying to think this situation through and figure out what the best course of action might be. Mind you, we've got no tools or anything like that, just basic standard riding gear. And again, we're early winter in Oregon. Snow is lightly falling, but it's made for great conditions. So that's the predicament we find ourselves in just as the sun is beginning to set. So I'm wondering what you would do under these circumstances, because I'll tell you what we did. We thought about solutions to the problem. The first solution was really one of self-preservation for me, and I thought, well, I should take my riding partner's bike and I should head back. I know exactly where the truck is, and that will probably be the most efficient means for getting both of us out of here. We also pondered the thought of riding double on his bike, but also in the back of our minds we're thinking, again, how much gas does he have left? How far can he really go? And especially if you throw two people on the bike, not only is that going to look weird, but you're going to burn up more fuel too. So we didn't choose that option. And ultimately I decided to pull out the map and try to show my buddy the quickest way back to the vehicle. I opened up my map. I showed Tom where we were, where he needed to go, and that was pretty simple and straightforward, except for the fact that it was getting dark and we didn't have any lighting or headlights or anything like that. So I sent Tom on his way. As soon as he was out of sight and I couldn't hear him anymore, I really felt like I had made the wrong decision. I thought that perhaps me riding back would have been the most efficient solution to our problem. I knew right where we were parked. I knew places where I might run into some other people, despite the fact that, we were riding in the wilderness and it was kind of the dead of winter. The likelihood of running into somebody else or other riders or campers was very, very slim. But that being said, there I was standing out there as the sun set, all alone in the wilderness, and admittedly, I wasn't feeling very good about it. For some reason, I didn't want to leave my bike behind, so I actually pushed it down the trail for a couple miles and then up an old road for about another mile till I finally gave up the go. And, the sun had set, the snow was flying, it was cold, and pushing that bike had just made me sweat more than I had when I was riding. So I was really freezing my ass off and a little bit fatigued from pushing the bike that far. And eventually I found a tree with a little bit of cover from the snowstorm, and I leaned my bike up against it, and I kind of wedged myself underneath my bike and leaned up against a tree for a while. I was really just looking for some shelter for a little bit. Couple things here. I don't know if you've ever been out in the wilderness in the dark when the snow's falling, but it's eerily quiet. The snow seems to have a way of dampening a lot of the other sounds, but one thing it doesn't dampen is twigs breaking and the sound of bushes moving. There was stuff moving around me, and it kind of wigged me out. So I didn't stay seated, sheltered, if you will, for very long. It was just wigging me out mentally, hearing all these sounds. Also, I was just wearing standard riding gear. All my clothing was damp. I was freezing sitting still, so I knew I had to abandon my bike and get hoofing it, get walking. And I've thought about this a lot over the years, and I'm just going to lay it out there. If I would have had a match or a lighter, I probably would have lit my bike on fire. I was that cold, and I wanted light. I wanted to be able to see, and that humanistic thing. I wanted that safety that maybe a fire could bring. But walking out there in the dark through the wilderness, it was sketchy. It's like you're in another world. You're in, the predator's domain, and you really have no defenses. You can barely see. It was super sketchy. So walking helped me out a lot. It warmed up my body to an extent. But here's an example of how cold I was. The sweaty helmet liner, the sweaty goggle foam, I actually ripped that stuff out and threw it on the ground because I was just that cold. My upper extremities were legitimately that cold. But I put the helmet back on, I put the goggles on, I left the shoulder pads on and all that. I was walking in my boots, and my mindset was really one of defense. I figured if something was going to attack me, which may sound absurd to some of you, but that was a real thought at the time. But if something was going to come after me, I thought I'd have a better chance of fighting it off, defending myself, or surviving, an attack if I still had my gear on. So that was really the mindset as I walked throughout the night. And it would be nice to cap this off with some sort of dramatic ending or conclusion, but there really isn't a lot of drama behind it. I walked for about 8 hours that night through the dark. I was getting really close to a main line when around the corner came some headlights, and Tom had also run out of fuel but managed to find his way to a camp. And then those people had spent the bulk of the evening looking for me, and unfortunately Tom got turned around, and it took a while for these people to figure out where I was. But it was a long hoof throughout the night. But I've never been so grateful in my life at that point in time when I saw those headlights. I was safe. It was over, and we went back to these people's camp. They took me back to their camp. They had a fire, which really helped warm me up, and they also had some beer. And man, I'll never forget one, how good that beer tasted after being out there all night, and two, how quickly I drank them. I was so thirsty, so anxious. That was just what the doctor ordered, and I'd actually kind of gotten dehydrated on my walk, and luckily it was snowing, so I would periodically stop and actually lick the snow and the precipitation off the top of my helmet. I drank everything in my Camelback, and we'd exerted ourselves pretty good that day, aside from the walk and pushing the motorcycle. But that's how it ended. I'm really happy to get out relatively unscathed, and like I said at the forward here of the show, learned a lot of lessons, and we can reflect on this and hopefully keep some of you or the rest of you out of trouble in the future. That's really what what the intent of this episode is. We don't have to dig too deep on this to point out the fact that I made a lot of mistakes that ultimately put myself and put my riding partner Tom at risk. Obviously that wrong turn and extending the ride far beyond what we'd planned, that was the deal breaker, but we weren't prepared or equipped to handle any of those situations. So I'll kind of walk you through that here real quick. I want to talk about tools here for just a second because we didn't have any. Now, running out of gas ultimately put us at risk, but a flat tire, a lost bolt, something broken could have left us in the very same situation. So I cannot stress enough the importance of carrying tools on your person, on your bike, to make those minor repairs and fixes to get you back to the rig, to get you back home. I've seen people use pliers when their throttle cable breaks to limp back to the rig. You'd be surprised what you could get away with and what you might be able to band-aid to get back, and sometimes that's just all you need. Now, I've talked about what the tools that you should bring look like in previous episodes of the podcast, so I'm not going to get into that. But to give you an example, it was about 2 years ago, I got a flat, and it was right around dark, and it was actually right in the same area, and I was prepared. I had a tube, I had CO2, I had tire irons, I had all the wrenches, I had everything I needed to swap out a tube in the event that I had actually gotten a flat, and I was able to put the bike on a stump, remove the rear wheel. 20 minutes later, I'm riding home, and actually by the time I got down to the asphalt, it had been dark, and it was another one of those situations where cell phone wasn't doing me any favors. Obviously, I could have walked out. I could have repeated the past and walked through the woods in the dark, but there was no cell service to speak of in that area. I'm sure I could have eventually found it, but I guess calling upon this experience, I was more prepared for that event. I was calm. Again, swapped the tube out, aired it up, and went on my way. So it's really important to have that stuff with you. Gear. This is a tough one for a lot of people because when we're talking about riding on the cusp of winter, good gear, Gore-Tex jackets, Gore-Tex pants, moisture wicking layers, they're very expensive, and it's easy just to throw a hoodie on and go out and ride. But I'll tell you what, I would have much rather had a $500 jacket while I was walking through the woods that night than the hoodie, the sweat-soaked hoodie that I was wearing. So that's definitely something to consider, again, when you're riding on the cusp of winter. And in the moment when you're out there ripping through the trails or down the roads, if the gear that you're wearing or the jacket's too warm or whatever, maybe open it up or remove it, and at least you'll have it on hand if something happens or when it cools off. I can't stress enough the importance of great gear, really in both climates. We're talking about the cusp of winter here, but also when things start to heat up, you want breathable layers so you don't overheat and exhaust yourself and get dehydrated. So when Tom and I were out there riding, we were pretty much dressed like we were at a motocross track, and that just doesn't cut it when the elements become a factor, and I want people to remember that. I didn't bring this up earlier, but cell phones, satellite communication, all these things that I talk about a lot, cell phones really weren't where they are today back in 2006, so there was no such thing as cell reception where I was, and reality is the phones were so primitive that I probably wasn't even carrying my phone at the time, and I definitely didn't have something like a Garmin InReach where I could send a satellite text and request help or something like that. So obviously nowadays I think most people ride with their cell phone, and again, I want to reinforce the fact that having something like the InReach or the Spot or an ePerb allows you to communicate with people and let them know how you're doing, let them know your whereabouts, let them know that you need help. So we don't want to forget about that stuff. You should also tell people where you're going, when you'll be back, and you should probably follow up with them and say, hey, I'll check in with you at this time. So my family and friends knew that I was going riding, but they thought I was going to be going riding for 2 days, and I don't think we made any plans to check in after the first day. So as far as they knew, everything was cool, everything was kosher. Meanwhile, I'm walking through the woods in the dark out there. So I think it would be good if you're going to go on multi-day rides to make sure you check in with friends or family periodically, maybe on a schedule, or just say, hey, if I don't get a hold of you by this time, you might want to follow up with me. I think that's always a good plan. And again, we're still going to find ourselves in situations where the cell phones don't work or it takes a long time to send a satellite text message. But before the trip, maybe talk to a few of your friends and family and say, hey, here's where I'm going, here's the route, and I'm going to reach out to you each and every day to let you know that I'm all right. And last thing here before we close it out, I know this was a really high-level overview of both my story and both some of my ideas for planning and preparing for motorcycle adventures. If you're really looking for information about planning for motorcycle adventures, check out one of those first 5 episodes of this podcast that'll go into much greater detail. But what spawned this thought, what spawned this episode today was I was recently training some guys on their adventure bikes and helping them improve their skills. They're going to go ride the Continental Divide. And obviously the first thing we talk about is safety. And that's not just on the bike, but it goes back to this planning and preparation phase too. It's just of the utmost importance. And I remember telling them, hey, I would hate to see somebody who I'd worked with repeat some of the same mistakes I've made in the past or find themselves in similar scenarios. So I thought it was important to get this information out there to again plant the seed and get you generating ideas for how you prepare or how you will handle scenarios like this. So I appreciate you guys listening. And with that, we're going to close it out. Short episode this week. Next week, Gianna Velarde. I know I promised that this week, but I'm still working on editing that podcast. She had raced Dakar. Again, amazing and inspiring story. And the week after that, we will have Sarah Garcia, who is also a Dakar rally racer. So really looking forward to putting those episodes out. Again, just want to thank everybody for listening and have a great weekend. Oh, shoot. One more thing real quick before we go. If you have a similar story to the one I just told from 2006 where you're out there, you kind of had to find a way to get back home or survive or whatever the case may be, I'd love to have you on the show. Hit me up, bendmotorcycleadventures@gmail.com. And obviously, this would be a great conversation to have. This would be a great topic. But what we want to do is continue to share this information and educate our listeners. The more we think about it, the more we generate ideas, the more well prepared we are for these kind of random, if you will, events. We want to be prepared for that stuff. We want to educate ourselves. So again, bendmotorcycleadventures@gmail.com if you think you have a story that we should hear. bendmotorcycleadventures.com. Don't forget, that is our website, and I've actually installed a podcast player on the site. It's in the footer. The latest episodes of the podcast will always be there, ready to play, but don't forget about iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, YouTube, you name it, we're there. bendmotorcycleadventures.com. And last thing, don't forget about us on social media at Bend Motorcycle Adventures on both Facebook and Instagram. Guys, we'll see you next week. Got a couple stories coming at you from women who raced Dakar this year. You don't want to miss them. We'll see ya.